Hello, everybody. Welcome back to MGTOW Chats. This is episode number 83. I'm your host, Ayam Sirias. As always, Lamprey is with me tonight, and we have a very special guest. It's Dr. E. Michael Jones. He was a former professor. He is now an author with more books than I can mention, although there will be links to his channel where you can purchase his books if you choose to. And he is also the editor at culturewars.com. Did I get that all right, Dr. Jones?
Yes, sir. Yes, you did.
Perfect. Great. It's great to have you. Thank you for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, now I want to, before we get into it, I would like to let the audience know that I came onto your work through my co-host, Nick, who will go by Nick tonight. It was him about a year ago that said, hey, you really need to listen to some of this E. Michael Jones stuff. So yeah, I've only been really getting into your stuff for the past 6 months. But it's profound, and a lot of people, I think, believe the same thing, and I'm very happy to be able to share it, especially the concept of logos. I have recently purchased one of Dr. Jones's books. It hasn't arrived yet. It's Libido Dominandi, and maybe we can get a little bit into that as it is more related to MGTOW content. But before we get started, I think, Nick, you wanted to start off with some questions?
Well, I just wanted to share a story. Dr. Jones, I'd like to share a bit about myself on how I discovered your work before getting into the meat of our discussion. I stumbled upon a chat of yours while I was killing time in a dingy coffee shop playing with my phone during my stint living in Asia. You were talking about your book, Slaughter of Cities, and during your discussion, the image of a photo of my grandfather while young came to my mind. The photo happens to be of him on top of a pile of rubble up against a Brooklyn brownstone. On the facade of this brownstone, written in big letters, said, "We never saw it coming." This is in reference to Robert Moses' work in building the New York State parkways, which cut right through his neighborhood. Fast forward about 15 years after that, my grandfather migrated out to Long Island, where now what is left of an Italian-American culture is under a full-blown attack by various entities and factions. So your storytelling about the breakup of ethnic communities, along with all your other work, left such a big impression on me that the Bible has migrated its way out of my closet and now sits on my nightstand. And with that being said, I want to thank you for joining us tonight.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Oh, well, maybe to get started, Dr. Jones, what I'd like you to do, because we have a small channel, I'm not sure how many of our listeners are familiar with who you are, but maybe you can explain a little bit about, define for us culture war and logos, as maybe our viewers aren't aware of that yet.
Okay. Biographically, I grew up in Philadelphia. I was born into an Irish neighborhood, an Irish parish in North Philadelphia. In 1954, the blacks crossed Lehigh Avenue on their march up Broad Street, and my family left and moved to what was a suburb, even though it was still inside the city limits. Years later, I began to realize that I was a guinea pig in an experiment that no one told me about. Right. I grew up in that neighborhood. Now I went to a Catholic school, so now people in the class were, instead of just all being Irish, they were Irish, Polish, Italian, and German for the most part. And when you have that type of mixture, you're trying to look for some type of common denominator. And what I realized later was that even though it was a Catholic school, we were supposed to think of ourselves now as white, because that was the whole point of the move. The people, the ethnics, were moved out of their neighborhoods, moved to the suburbs as a form of Americanization. They had to buy a car. They had to watch television. They spent all their time getting drilled into their minds what it meant to be an American. And as a result, they lost their identity. And as a result, the church, although seemingly strong, lost its ability to communicate to its people. Because before that time, they talked the ethnic languages of the people that lived there. Every city in the north and the east was basically a colony, a series of neighborhoods, which were basically colonies of people from Europe who lived in different types of neighborhoods. And so weakened by this. I'm telling you my story, but I could tell you the story of people who are calling me as well, because it's the same story.
Right.
This could be Maureen's story. This is the lady who called me recently and talked to me because she was in Boston, but it's the same story. She grew up on a street where everybody was Irish and Catholic. The Negro proxy warriors came, ethnically cleansed the neighborhood. She went to the suburbs, and at that point she began to feel deracinated, uprooted, and as a result vulnerable to cultural influences. And the cultural influence that made the biggest impression on her at that time was Madonna.
Oh yeah.
And Madonna was, in a sense, created for that cultural and that demographic. Catholic school girls, Madonna wore a crucifix, and she taught Catholic school girls how to become sluts.
Right.
That was the whole point of Madonna. And this lady that I talked to was a good learner. She was an avid learner. She learned really well how to become a slut. When she went to college, she had 5 intense years of promiscuity, 3 abortions, and ended up with a feeling of disgust at sex, and ended up living with a lesbian for 14 years after that. So all of these stories sort of come together in a series of books that I wrote. So you've already mentioned Slaughter of Cities. That was about ethnic cleansing, the ethnic cleansing of the Catholic neighborhoods. And when people got demoralized, the Catholic girls got demoralized from watching Madonna on television, they became involved in the sexual revolution. And that book is Libido Dominandi, which talks about how sexual liberation is really a form of political control. And that is basically, I then am trying to sort this out. I went to Germany, and from 73 to 76, I was a teacher at a gymnasium in Germany, and I landed there right at the high noon of the sexual revolution in Germany.
Right.
Which was much more intense than it was in the United States, much more intense. And so my students, these are girls, and they're teenage girls. They're going to see Schulmädchen Report. There were 13 Schulmädchen reports, all of them softcore porn, basically to break down the morals of the girls there. They were reading Bravo, and Bravo was a teen magazine, and it had an advice column done by Dr. Sommer, whose name was really Martin Weinstein, and he told them to masturbate. Jesus. So it was right out of the playbook of Wilhelm Reich. The man I just talk about in Libido Dominandi, the man who landed on the cover of the New York Times Magazine in 1970, the spiritus movens behind the Paris Revolution of 1968. All of these things came together, but over this period of time, I was able to put 2 and 2 together, and that's basically the story of my life.
Right.
I was a guinea pig, but I was a smart guinea pig. And I just kind of figured out what happened, and I don't know why I'm the only guy, but I'm glad I figured it out, because once I say this, it resonates.
Yes.
With a lot of different people all over the world now.
Yep.
And so to get back to, I did this book on Libido Dominandi, did this book on sexual liberation, and I just thought, okay, it's just, all these people, but it turned out that a lot of them were Jews.
Right.
And I began to realize, well, wait a minute, this isn't just a coincidence. Wilhelm Reich was a Jew. Al Goldstein was a Jew. Philip Roth was a Jew. All these people who were involved in the sexual revolution were Jews. And this led me to think through, maybe there's another book out there, and that led me to do the book, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit.
Right. That's another...
At that point, I had to come up with a definition of the Jew. In order to do that, I had to come up with the word logos. I had to use the word logos. Now, I had studied Greek when I was in college, and I remember all those English definitions of the word logos. And so the thesis, I needed this. I needed this word, because without this word, I could not explain what the Jew was. Because there's just all this mystification. Is it racial? Is it this? Is it that? It turns out, in the thesis of that book is that the Jew is a theological construct that began at the time of Christ, when the Jewish people had to either accept or reject their Messiah. Right. The Jews who accepted Jesus Christ as the Messiah became the Catholic Church, the New Israel, and those who rejected them are known as Jews. And what is a Jew? A Jew is a rejecter of Christ, who is the Logos incarnate. So a Jew is a rejecter of Logos. And when you reject logos, you become which is the order of the universe, which is rationality. When you reject that, you become a revolutionary, and that's exactly what happened to the Jews. They chose Barabbas over Christ, and within 30 years, they rose up in revolutionary uprising against Rome, and they were destroyed. The temple was destroyed, and then 60 years they did it again, and they were destroyed again and scattered throughout the Mediterranean basin. And from that point, for the next 2,000 years, they were involved in virtually every form of revolutionary ferment throughout history. So that's the short thumbnail sketch of who I am and how I came to talk about logos.
Right, and so the culture war, and man, the story you tell there, you're right. It resonates with so many people because everybody is living through it, in real time.
Yes.
And
so you have the choice of being an unconscious guinea pig or a conscious guinea pig, and I think being a conscious guinea pig is superior.
Absolutely.
And so I'm trying to raise the consciousness of people because of consciousness is what makes you free. When you understand the trap, there's a trap there. You don't walk into it. If you don't know it's there, you can fall into it unconsciously. And believe me, there are plenty of traps out there, and your generation has probably discovered all of them. I know, talked to a 28-year-old here in town. He said, we're the generation that grew up with pornography on our phones.
Yeah.
If there's ever a trap, it is, for men, it is pornography.
Absolutely.
So that is one of the reasons I'm doing this. I began Libido Dominandi with an anecdote about the Israeli forces coming into Ramallah, invading their country, taking over the TV stations and broadcasting pornography over the TV stations. Now, why would they do that if pornography means freedom? Well, it doesn't mean freedom. It's a weapon. Yeah. It's psychological warfare, and basically the elites in the Western world, the United States, Germany, and now I'm seeing Sweden on the radar screen. The elites waged war against their own people.
Yeah.
Urban renewal was one aspect, one front of that war, and sexual liberation was the elites waging war against their own people. Now, when I say that, I have to be specific because, America, there's no such thing as American. There are three groups here. Three ethnic groups based on three religions: Protestant, Catholic, and Jew. That's the triple melting pot. That's the real hidden grammar of ethnicity in the United States. And during this period of time, the Protestants and the Jews formed an alliance to destroy the Catholics. It's that simple. Those books will prove it to you if you don't believe it.
Oh, yeah. No, definitely. And to the listeners, please go check out his website, Culture Wars. His books are available there, as well as, are they on Amazon too?
Yes.
Okay, good.
I have both paper books and ebooks on Amazon.
So you mentioned, say, the 28-year-old boy who said my generation grew up with porn on their phones. I'm 44, so I'm the generation after the boomers. We didn't have porn on our phones, but it's looking back, it's so easy to see how over-sexualized everything became. Media, Hollywood, music, the whole works. It was completely over-sexualized. So this culture war, are you saying it started with this sexual revolution?
Yeah, I think it did. I mean, I'm saying basically the opening salvo was 1965. It was a momentous year in many regards. The Second Vatican Council had ended. The Catholic Church was completely off balance at this point, didn't know what to think. People didn't know what was up or down. The whole issue of birth control was up in the air and being deliberately manipulated by Father Hesburgh of Notre Dame in collaboration with the Rockefeller Foundation. Griswold versus Connecticut had been handed down by the Supreme Court, which legalized the sale of contraceptives. And then the crucial thing that happened in '65 was the film called The Pawnbroker, which is Holocaust porn. It's Holocaust porn. The Jews who ran Hollywood wanted to have naked women on the screen because this was a way of competing against television. The other way, the expensive way, was sending everybody to Rome and doing things like Ben-Hur and Antony and Cleopatra. That cost a lot of money. Bare breast didn't cost anything.
Right.
And that's precisely, so the Jews, these cynical people, behind the movie exploited the Holocaust for their own to get bare breasts on the screen. A completely cynical exploitation of Jewish suffering, but they didn't care because they wanted to break the production code, which had been in existence for 33 years, and they succeeded.
Yeah,
they had to use the Holocaust. They had tried. In 1964 was the year basically that Hollywood declared war on the production code, and they came up with sex farces like Kiss Me Stupid with Dean Martin and Kim Novak. And it bombed. It really bombed. It didn't work. And then they tried Artsy Fartsy, the art film from Sweden, which I'm just learning about now. But basically, The Silence by Ingmar Bergman. I don't know whether you did Ingmar Bergman, but it was like a minor religious observance to go to one of these art theaters and watch a Bergman movie. Bergman was collaborating with a Swede by the name of Harry Schein. Doesn't sound like a Swedish name, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Doesn't sound Swedish to me. You know, it's not Gunnar Olafsson or something. It's Harry Schein, who happens to be a Jew from Austria who escaped the Nazis and went to Sweden. And he was collaborating with Hollywood. He was the broker he was the producer for Ingmar Bergman. And they cooked up code breakers. And that's what they did.
Wow.
The Silence was a code breaker. It was intentionally created as a code breaker, and it was exported to Germany, and that's what it did. It broke the code in Germany because it was art. Right. Damn it. It was art. And don't criticize art. It was a cynical exploitation of all this. He was the broker between Bergman and Hollywood. Hollywood was giving Bergman Best Foreign Film year after year because Hollywood was interested in using him to break the code. 1963 is when he did The Silence. That's when the big assault happened in Germany. If you're interested in the German story, read my ebook, Werner Heisenberg and Jewish Science. I just did it, and I was in Germany. I gave a speech in Germany in October, and I did a lot of research and explains it in graphic detail, what happened there. If you want to know what happened in Ireland, I just did an interview with Gran Torino in Ireland, the situation in Ireland. What happened in Germany in the 60s happened in Ireland 10 years ago. It's the same thing. It's the same story, and it happened in America in 1965. It's the same story. It's in many ways the same group of people, and it's the same plan, which is basically break down the sexual morality of the people, because then you'll be able to control them. It's that simple. Oh. I don't have to tell young people that pornography is addictive. They know that.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? The people who make it, basically produce it for free now, know that too. And the whole point of this is to turn you into a docile sex robot. Because it's and so you've got your education debt and your pornography, and so sit in your mother's basement and don't bother us.
Right. You know, when you mentioned about how they did it through art and saying don't criticize art, they're very thorough with this culture war and been very successful because, and one of the ways was, I think you would agree, is they redefine terms. They play with language, and I think that has a lot to do with how kind of you came to the understanding by taking that word logos and going, wait a second, what does this really mean, right?
It's the most important word in human history. Yeah. I said so it must be true. No, it is. It's the most important word in human history because it exists at the center of human history. So what we have is a crucial, it's developed in Greece, obviously. It's a Greek word, although the people at the SPLC said it was a Latin word. Anyway, it's a Greek word. It came out of Greek philosophy.
Uh-huh.
And it was adopted by St. John when he wrote his gospel in Greek. And so this was a commitment. The Catholic Church, the gospel, was committed to accepting the legitimacy of human endeavor, sincere human endeavor to know God, to know the good, to know the truth. Yeah. And that's why it was incorporated. And so once it began as a kind of, well, there seems to be an order out there. Let's call it Logos. And then what's the order like? Well, the Greeks were famous for geometry. It's kind of like a static order, but obviously, if triangles, you can plot graphs, stuff like that. Anyway, it's more than that, because by the time of the revelation came, when Jesus Christ came, Logos was a person. It was not just abstract plan. It was a force. It was the force in human history. It was the driving force in human history, which is we would call divine providence, which is basically God's plan for all of human history. And for the first time, with Christianity, with this event, people began to see, it looks as if there's a meaning to history. Now it looks as if there's going to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you can sort of plot yourself on this graph, and it's only going to happen once. It's not going to go around in circles the way it does in India and lead to hopelessness. It's going to happen once, so you better take it seriously. And you better do your best to get it straight, because you only have one go around here. You only have one life.
That's right, man.
It's over. So I don't want to use that word. People criticize me when I use that word. So don't mess it up.
Right.
It's the only life you have.
Yeah,
and go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say along the lines of Logos, because one of the things I've noticed you've been talking about recently is because it's sort of the divine plan. It's the force that kind of runs the universe. This Logos. When you go against it, or when you try to suppress it, you've been talking a lot about the consequences to that. Do you want to mention a little bit about that?
Yes. There's a plan for your life, and your plan for your life is implicit in your body. Your body has a plan. You know that there's a plan for the way your body functions, the way your stomach functions, the way your muscles function, and your sex organs have a plan too. And the plan is obvious from the beginning, that it's male and female joining together and producing offspring. Right. That is the Logos of human sexuality. We are living now in an era where the oligarchs have declared war on the Logos of sexuality. It started off with, German porn, softcore porn films, but now it's really serious. Okay, so first, the penultimate step was homosexuality, the promotion of homosexuality, because that is a kind of narcissistic fantasy that the oligarchs want to promote. So you have the illusion that you have hegemony over being. Okay, right. That was the phrase in Planned Parenthood. Freedom means to determine your own being. This is totally preposterous. You can't determine your being. You are what you are. And so the illusion that you can leads you to all sorts of perversions like homosexuality, and now it leads you to give the illusion, if you're mentally disturbed and you're a male and you think you're a female, they will pump you up with hormones and mutilate you so that you can live according to your narcissistic fantasy. Yes. This is an attack on being. It's an attack on nature. It's an attack on the moral law. It's an attack on Logos. Why is that? Because Logos is what makes you free. Logos is your ability to think, and your ability to think means I know what they're doing and it's wrong. They want to abolish any type of notion that you have the right to say, no, it's wrong.
Yes. So part of Logos is being able to criticize what occurs in its absence. And I know you mentioned in a talk not too long ago, you mentioned it a couple times, on how when they try to stop us from talking about it, stop us from criticizing, you said that it leads to violence.
That's right. So I said this in specific. I said it twice, specifically in regard to the Pittsburgh shooting and specifically with regard to the shooting in Pollard. Okay, both are instances of exactly what you just mentioned. Okay, the Jewish organizations like the ADL and the SPLC have suppressed speech for decades now. Both of them even got so far as to become involved in government enforcement, tried to get the government to enforce their speech codes. both the SPLC and the FBI got involved. I'm sorry, the SPLC and the ADL got involved with the FBI. The FBI has basically kicked the SPLC out, but they're still involved with the ADL. Now, when you get involved with the ADL, you're involved in suppressing speech. That's all the ADL does. Right. It's an organization that spies on you, it keeps dossiers on you, and it will do whatever it can within its power to wreck your career if you criticize a Jew. If you disagree with a Jew, they will go after you and they will call you an anti-Semite. Because an anti-Semite, the definition now is basically anyone who disagrees with a Jew is now an anti-Semite. Now, I'm saying after the recent shooting in the synagogue in Poway, California, the ambassador of the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations went before the United Nations and gave a speech, and he said, the time for talking is over. The time for conversation is over.
They would love that.
Anti-Semitism a crime. Yeah. Okay, that means now, I mean, I had this conversation with this guy, Dr. Brown. He calls me
I saw that.
Anti-Semite. Well, wait a minute. I tried to explain to him, you can't get a word in edgewise with this guy. He's always putting words in your mouth. I kept trying to explain to him why I'm not an anti-Semite and why someone who criticizes Jews is not an anti-Semite. But you can't get, see, he refuses to listen. He's impossible to talk to. The proof of this is that second video he did where he's got me on the screen. It's a recording from before that he had done. And he's kind of ranting at me, ranting at my picture. And then he says, you get the last word. And then I'm on the screen, and I'm not there. I'm on the screen. And then he cuts me off. And then he says, and this is what he said. Oh, he puts words in my mouth. Yeah. Because he cannot face up to the fact that the current definition of anti-Semitism is anyone who disagrees with a Jew. Now, you can even say the same thing that the Jew says, and they will call you an anti-Semite. If you say, for example, you're the Jews are behind gay marriage, that's anti-Semitic. Well, Amy Dean said it. Jews say it. They brag about it. But if you say it, you're anti-Semitic. And now, if this ambassador gets his way, you will go to jail. You will go to jail because somebody like this guy Brown will call you an anti-Semite. And that makes you, now it's a crime if this guy succeeds. So you will go to jail. And that is precisely the situation in England right now. Jez Turner went to jail because some Jew did not like what he said. Now, this is intolerable. This is an intolerable type of tyranny, and we have to stand up to it. Because what they're doing, in my weaker moments, I think they know what they're doing. But basically what I'm saying here is that every time these people succeed in suppressing speech, some guy somewhere picks up a gun. Yeah. And what you realize is they both agree. What did the shooter in Poway have in common with Ambassador Dannon? They both believe that the time for conversation is over. Now, they have created a dialectic here in which terrorism leads to acts of repression, and acts of repression lead to more terrorism. And that is the current dynamic. And we, the overwhelming majority of the American people, are kind of like caught in the crossfire here between the Jewish organizations who want to suppress speech and the terrorists who find that talking is no longer, they can't talk to anybody, so they're going to pick up a gun. That's the situation we're in right now.
Yeah. And they'll never, the mainstream media will never blame it on the fact that there's no more conversation. They'll always blame it on something else. For example, and this is related to my regular content and most of the listeners that are listening to you today. For example, there's one article that came out that said it's no coincidence the synagogue shooter posted about the Red Pill movement, and then it goes on to blame men's rights activists and people, other men like myself and the men that are listening, blaming us, men who basically are trying to walk away from the illusion. They're trying to walk towards logos. They
will use this crisis as an excuse to go after people they don't like. It's that simple. That's what's happening here. Okay, now let's take a step back here. Now, Dr. Brown is a Zionist. I mean, he promotes the state of Israel. In the state of Israel, if they don't like you and you happen to be a Palestinian, they can shoot you. They can shoot you with impunity. They did it. They did it. So to what extent does Dr. Brown's rhetoric, Zionist rhetoric, lead to the death of Palestinians? I think that's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
Because Zionism is an entity, and they've got a lot of guns over there. And they shoot people they don't like over there. When the Palestinians protest, they shoot them. Now, that, it seems to me, is teaching what Shakespeare would call bloody instructions. And the question remains, so if it's okay for the Israelis to gun down innocent women and children, why is it wrong for this guy to walk into a synagogue and start shooting people?
Right.
You can't have it both ways. Okay? You can't defend Israel gunning down people and then condemn someone when he shoots Jews. It's the same dynamic here. And I'm saying it's our duty as creatures of Logos to insist on a conversation. We're not going to let the ambassador shut us up.
Yeah.
We're not going to let the terrorists shut us up, because the Israelis are in cahoots with the terrorists here. This is the dynamic that we have here. This repression creates this act of terrorism. This act of terrorism creates this repression. And what they want to do is use this as an excuse to shut down anything they don't like. It's all a form of control. Now, in Sri Lanka, 300 some Catholics were murdered with bombs going off on Easter Sunday.
Yeah.
Has anyone proposed making anti-Catholicism illegal?
No, of course not.
No, not going to happen.
Well, that's the thing with these people is they despise Logos, but they love hypocrisy. Hypocrisy. That's their bread and butter.
Yes.
The speaking of shootings, did you hear just recently there was a shooting in I believe it was Colorado? Did you hear about that?
No, it's hard to keep up with shootings. They happen every day.
I know, it's insane.
I'm saying, look, it's not a coincidence. We have unprecedented levels of thought control and unprecedented levels of basically daily shootings. I'm saying there's a connection here.
Yes.
There's a connection. The more you suppress speech, the more you promote violence. That's the connection. I read the manifesto that this guy wrote. He says, I'm tired. I've been demonized for my entire life, and I'm tired of it, and no one will listen to me. So I'm going to take up a gun, and I'm going to start a revolution. He was very conscious about how the revolution, the dynamic of revolution, he learned it from Lenin.
Wow.
You know, there's no question. That was Lenin's program. Acts of terrorism leading to repression, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until the situation becomes intolerable and the revolution breaks out. That's the plan. I think both groups know that.
Right. Well, in regards to this latest shooting, since you haven't heard about it, the perpetrator, now get this, the perpetrator was a female transitioning to a man and hated Christianity. So it wasn't the red pills, it wasn't the men's rights, it wasn't even a male. It wasn't a Muslim. It was a man. It was a woman who thought she was a man and was transitioning. That's who went and killed. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, in a sense, I'm not surprised. 40% of all transsexual people who go through the operation commit suicide. So there's look. First of all, you're starting off with violence against yourself by mutilating your own body. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the violence is there. The only question is, well, how's it going to come out? Right.
And the thing is about these shootings and what I mentioned before in regards to kind of, in particular, my audience. I mean, even though we're talking mostly about men's rights and stuff on my channel, and we expand into different topics, is why we have you on. But a lot of my listeners are good listeners, and they like to hear these truths kind of get spit at them. And I was hoping that maybe I could get you to address my regular listeners and explain, maybe give them some advice, because in regards to MGTOW, I mentioned this to you briefly before we came on, is that it's sort of MGTOW is sort of a response to this lack of logos in the world today. In feminism, that part of the cultural revolution of feminism, MGTOW again is a sort of a response to that, where men are now choosing celibacy. They're choosing not to date. There's no such thing as courtship anymore. Marriage is almost a death sentence, where your first marriage is a 50% chance likely of divorce, and everyone after that goes up exponentially. Custody for men is horrible. I think the highest suicide rate in the Western world is men between the ages, I think it's 35 and 45, and most of them are divorced fathers. I mean, it's so in the condition that the world is in today, and I believe it has to do, it's rooted in what you've talked about in your culture war, sexual revolution, feminism. There's a response for a lot of men that are just sort of, okay, I'm done. I have to drop out and kind of find myself.
That's good. That's good, because you will never find yourself if you have a sexual addiction. So the first thing you'd have to do is say, I'm going to break that sexual addiction so that I can regain my mind. Lust darkens the mind. Right. That's why the oligarchs promote it, because it makes you stupid and you're easy to push around because you're a slave of your passions, and all I have to do is manipulate your passions to control you. A man has as many masters as he has vices. That's what St. Augustine said. And so if you want to be free, avoid vice. But on the other hand, if you want to control people, promote vice. And that's the tack that I described in Libido Dominandi, beginning with the Marquis de Sade and going all the way up to when I ended that book. So yes, I mean, I wouldn't call it celibacy. I'd call it chastity.
Chastity.
Celibacy seems to, it's like a vow you take when you become a priest that you are never going to get married.
Oh, okay.
That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about chastity, which is basically self-control. You have to regain control over your own mind and body. And the only way you can do that is by kicking, like the porn addiction, or if you have a masturbation addiction, you have to stop. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying it's possible. I'm saying, look, this is the whole point I tried to talk to you about Logos incarnate. It's not just some old guy telling you don't do it.
Right.
There is a power out there, the same power that created you, that gave you the being and the essence that you have, is out there waiting to help you. And there's a plan for your life. I said this to Roosh. You know, I'm not trying to justify what you did, but maybe you had to do that to get to where you are. But the good news is, even if you did do that, there's a way out of it. This is what I'm trying to say here. It's not just geometry. It is geometry, okay? It is physics. It is the solar system. But it's also your mind. It's also your soul, and it's also your body. And your mind can retake control of your body. It's possible, because there's help out there, and the help is known as grace in classical theological terms, and the source of grace is the sacrament, and the home of the sacrament is the Catholic Church. No other churches do not have sacraments, or valid sacraments anyway.
Right.
And so I'm saying, I'm just not telling you, okay, don't do it, and then you're on your own. Here's the philosophy book and blah blah blah. I'm writing a philosophy book. I don't denigrate philosophy. I spend my life thinking about philosophy, but I'm saying this history of Logos that I'm doing entered a crucial period, because the Greeks, that you could have a God who was transcendent, like Aristotle's God, and you could have a God who was immanent, like Plato's God, but the immanent God he loved you, but he wasn't powerful, and the powerful God didn't care one way or the other about you. So you were stuck, you were in a bind, and suddenly you realize, well, wait a minute, they were like the 7 blind Hindus and the elephant. In other words, they were both touching a part of the same thing, and they didn't realize they were both parts of the same thing. And the word we use for those two things, those two opposites that are part of the same thing, is the Trinity.
Right.
And once that notion of Trinity entered human consciousness, it became imperative that you get with the plan. That is the plan. You can't pretend it is not the plan. And the places that didn't understand it, in many ways through no fault of their own, like I'm talking about Islam now,
Yep.
History left them behind. They were way ahead of my barbarian ancestors in Germany and Ireland, but it stopped.
Do you know? Do you know how that happened? Because
yes, I do.
Well,
I have a whole chapter on it, as a matter of fact.
Oh, do you? Because
yeah, I do.
Because I don't know if I told you this, but I'm a Muslim. I converted when I was in Indonesia. I lived in Indonesia for about 13 years, and I married a Muslim woman. So I converted through marriage. I had to convert through marriage. One has to give in, right? And they're not going to. So I converted, and I spent a lot of time studying the religion. And I don't know if you mentioned this in your book, but I learned about how Islam I'd say Islam lasted about after Muhammad died. I'd say it lasted about 400 years, and then it died. And what I learned was that the current religion, which I don't even call Islam, I call it Islamism or Mohammedism, it basically died with the coming of a Persian convert named Bukhari, who many people believe was actually a Jew. Is that something that was a part of your studies there?
That name does not sound familiar. I spent a lot of time talking about Persians in the chapter on Islam.
Ah, okay.
Because it never really took in Persia. It was, I mean, the Persians were an ancient, sophisticated culture that goes back 2,500 years, and the Arabs were not. But the Arabs conquered Persia.
Right.
Militarily, and they imposed Islam on Persia. And I mean, I've had long conversations with Persians about this, and I don't think it ever took. I don't think it ever. First of all, the Persians created their own version of Islam called Shia Islam.
Yes.
And the Sunnis all consider them heretics, and some Sunnis would prefer to chop off their head before they chop off my head. The animosity is so intense. But I think Shia Islam is in many ways a protest movement against the Arab conquest.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that I think Islam had a stultifying effect on Persian culture. Suhrawardi, I cover him in there. He was basically made a big impression on Saladin's son, and Saladin didn't like the impression, so he persuaded his son to chop Suhrawardi's head off. And at that point, the Persians kind of say, well, all right, I figured it out. It's dangerous to be a philosopher. I'm not going to be a philosopher anymore. I'm going to be a poet. And what happened is the birth of Persian poetry, which is part of the greatest poetry in the world. Hafez, people like that. Amazing poetry. But it's kind of wine, women, and song, and they just kind of checked out because being a philosopher was too dangerous in Persia.
Right.
And I think it had a stultifying effect because many of the greatest Islamic philosophers happen to be Persians.
That's right.
Because of their background.
Well,
now we have reached the point where everybody's getting involved in examining the roots of the Quran.
Yes.
And I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. Gabriel Reynolds is doing this at Notre Dame. He just did a book on it. But I don't think that Islam is going to be able to withstand the scrutiny. I don't think it's going to be able to do it.
No, I don't think it will either. And I'm a Muslim. I call myself a Muslim. I mean, and if you have a chance, check out the name Bukhari, who was a Persian, and it was about 200 years after Muhammad passed. He was the originator of the Ahadith, which is the thousands upon thousands of volumes of literature that was written and collected 200 to 300 years after Muhammad had died. Bukhari was a Jewish Persian converted to Islam, and that's the current religion of Islam today. And you're right, it will not stand up to scrutiny, not at all.
See, I was in Golistan. I was in Mashhad a year ago, and one of my friends there keeps getting me into this debate with this mullah from Qom. So the mullah shows up, and the mullah asked me a question about faith and reason. So I start off on my short history of faith and reason. And since we're in Golistan, and since I was doing research at the time, I started to talk about the wheel, because that's where the wheel was invented. I mean, it's the great Eurasian landmass. It's flat. They had horses there. They wouldn't have any place else, and that's where the wheel was invented. And I said, the wheel was invented by, and he stops me and he says, it was invented by a prophet. I said, a prophet? I said, we're talking about like 13,000 years ago. Right. He said, no, it was a prophet who invented the wheel.
Right.
Well, I said, how do you know this? He said, it's in the Hadith.
Oh, God.
It's in the Hadith.
Oh, God.
And so I said, well, I mean, okay, I understand what the Hadith are. First of all, they're not, that's not canonical, okay? I know it's like commentaries on the Quran, but I don't have to accept the Quran. I'm not a Muslim, and I certainly don't have to accept the Hadith. And besides, I think there's a simpler explanation. But the problem here is that there is no secondary causality in Islam.
Right.
That's the problem. You need secondary causality in order to have science, because otherwise everything comes directly from the mind of God. That's Maimonides, the Jewish scholar, said that the Islamic God is like the caliph, and the caliph goes for an afternoon ride, and when he comes to the gate of the palace, he decides to go left or he decides to go right. But before he gets there, he doesn't know what he's going to do.
Yeah.
Well, you can't. That's a mind. First of all, you cannot fathom the mind of God because your mind is not deep enough, not smart enough.
Yeah. But
secondly, you've got a God who basically is pure will, and there's kind of no. If you say he's bound by logos or something like that, you're impugning his power, and so as a result, science could not develop there. Many people made valiant efforts. Averroes, Ibn Rushd made a valiant effort. They're always making this last-ditch attempt to save Aristotle, and they always lose. Yeah. The Asherites always win out again in the end against the Mu'tazilites. Now that's okay. That's fine. Okay, it's not a happy ending. There's a movie on Avicenna that the British-German collaboration. But anyway, the end of the movie is there's Avicenna. The Asherites rebel. These are the fundamentalists, and they're burning down the library. This is the tragedy of Iran in a nutshell. Everybody burned down their libraries.
That's right.
They're on the crossroads of the Eurasian landmass. People come in, the Mongols come in. The first thing they do is burn down their libraries. This is part of the tragedy of Islamic thought. And Averroes, he was known in Latin as Averroes, Ibn Rushd, made a valiant attempt to just say, okay, it's Aristotle, it's philosophy, it's worth looking into. And that's true. It contradicts the Quran. Mm-hmm. That's true. Okay, let's just call a peace here and say the Quran is right when it says the world was created, but Aristotle's right in philosophy, that's theology. In philosophy, he's right when he says it's eternal. Well, you can't have that. That doesn't work. You're not going to be able to. The crisis came not in Islam. It did sort of come in Islam. Averroes was despised by his own people, but he became hugely important in the Christian West, in Paris in the 13th century. But Aquinas had Averroes' commentary on Aristotle on his desk when he was writing his Summa Contra Gentiles. But he could not accept this. We cannot accept this doctrine of the two truths. And they basically, the denial of that preserved Logos in the West. Yeah, did not preserve it in the Islamic world. I'm saying this. I'm a friend. I have lots of friends, and I'm honored by the fact that I've had lots of deep conversations with Iranian friends. And what I'm telling you now is the gist of these conversations.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. I think from my opinion and my studies on the religion and on the Quran, I've noticed. I think the Muslims lost Logos about the beginning of the first millennium is when it started. Just they lost it, and they haven't been able to get it back. You're absolutely right. They can't.
There's some block there, but now okay, you guys, the Muslims are off in the desert all by themselves. Well, that's not possible anymore. The neoconservatives declared war on Islam. The United States is waging war on Islam right now. That obviously the Iraq war, and now John Bolton, the psychopath in charge of foreign policy, is now sending aircraft carriers to the Persian Gulf. I think Bolton wants to finish off the job here by attacking Iran. That will not work out well. I guarantee you. All the adults in the room, in the military, in the army, have warned the people in the White House, you cannot win this war. Mm-hmm. You should contemplate what you did in Iraq, because you destroyed that country, and by doing that, you created Iran as a great regional power there. And it was Iran, Russia and Syria that defeated the United States in Syria.
Yeah.
So, again, here, you're caught in the middle here. You're caught in the middle here, and you've got another dialectic here. And I'm trying to say, we need to take a step back. We need to talk to these people. I've talked to them. They are the politest people in the world. They are. I was in Iran, marching down the street, and some celebration of the revolution, surrounded by women in chadors, and they're all turned to my translator. What are they saying? Death to America. That's what they're saying.
Wow.
I'm the only guy in Tehran wearing a tie, and they're surrounded by women saying death to America. Well, guess what? I look like an American, believe it or not. And people would come up to me and they'd say to me, "Are you an American?" And I felt like saying, "No, I'm a Canadian." But I said, "Yes, I'm an American." And they said, I'd like to go to America. In spite of everything that America has done to them, they still have this sense that that's the government, that's not the people. It's still possible to talk to these people.
Yep.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Now we're getting close to the top of the hour. We have about 10 minutes before the hour's up, and I know that Nick wanted to ask a few things to you, Dr. Jones.
Yeah, I like to change course here and discuss a little bit why the Catholic Church has this bend don't break mentality, playing not to win but playing not to lose. You see Cardinal Dolan, shaking hands with the Prime Minister of Ireland, who's a homosexual. There's so-called talk about excommunicating Andrew Cuomo, but again, you don't see the Catholic Church being proactive, and I respect the Catholic Church. Again, I've been going to church a little bit more now, learning a little bit more about myself and getting older, but it seems that the Catholic Church is somewhat just silent on this social engineering that's taking place in the western parts of Europe and the United States. And I'd like your opinion on that. I'm asking, why is the Catholic Church not doing anything and just rolling over? I mean, how much longer is it going to be until Catholic Church starts embracing sodomy? It seems like that's what they're hell-bent on, going after them with this whole pedophile thing. And you've mentioned this, but why is the Catholic Church not being proactive?
Because I told you there was a war against the Catholic Church, and the war included the corruption of the morals of the people in it, and that included the priest. And so the priests who were sexualized, I've described this before, most people are heterosexual, so they left, and that concentrated the percentage of homosexuals in the clergy, and gradually they formed what Archbishop Vigano called a homosexual mafia. Cardinal McCarrick, highest level of the church in America, he's a homosexual, a notorious homosexual. Everybody knew it.
Wow.
The thing that made this possible was Americanism. Every Catholic bishop became an Americanist during the anti-communist crusade. And the anti-communist crusade went all the way up to 1989, when the Berlin Wall came down. John Paul II was involved in the anti-communist crusade, and that gave America the aura of respectability, which meant that sexual revolution had the aura of respectability, and all these people had their own unruly passions, and they caved into it, and they succumbed to their passions because America was telling them to do it. And then once they became enslaved to their passions, they were blackmailable, and then they became neutered because of that, and so they don't say anything. They don't want to offend anybody. They don't want to offend. They're afraid. A lot of these people are blackmailable. Certainly McCarrick was blackmailable. If he comes out and says sodomy is a sin that cries to heaven for vengeance, next day the Washington Post is going to publish him with pictures of him in some men's room somewhere. So he's not going to say it. That's the short explanation of why the church doesn't say anything.
So you think there's a solution in sight for the Catholic Church?
Of course there is. The church cannot fail.
Right.
So what we're seeing is a purgation of these elements. It may not happen with this Pope, but I think what this consciousness I'm talking about has a direct relevance to the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church was a victim of warfare that they did not understand.
Right.
What I'm saying now, I cannot teach at a Catholic university if I say this kind of stuff. I will immediately be fired, because I have to toe the Americanist line. I cannot say that ethnic cleansing destroyed Catholic neighborhoods. I would be considered a bad person. Look at John McGreevy. He wrote a decent book on parish boundaries, but he had to blame the Catholics for the problem. Well, I'm sorry, but it wasn't the Catholics. They were the victim. Don't blame the victim, John.
Jeez. So, I mean, when you say Americanism, does that does kind of that have a connection with Israel? The concept of Americanism?
Americanism was declared a heresy by Leo XIII in 1892, Testem Benevolentiae. It basically meant that the church should function according to democratic principles.
Okay,
that's what he was bothered about, and they said that's wrong. No, what it came to be later. Brian Hare gave a talk at a secret conference at St. Mary's College, the place that fired me for being against abortion, and he said, when it comes to sex, the United States knows more than the Catholic Church. That's current state of affairs Americanism. Talk to Father James Martin, the Jesuit. Talk to the Jesuits about how they feel about America. They are flaming, flagrant Americanists.
That's what I want to ask you now. Now, Pope Francis is a Jesuit. Now, I'm slowly learning more about being a Catholic and the history of it. If Pope Francis is a Jesuit, does that mean he has to answer to the Black Pope?
No, but does that mean he's going to defend Jesuits? Yes. I mean, that blood runs thicker than water. That's what's going on here. The Jesuits, read America. Why is it called America Magazine? Does that give you a clue about their attitude toward this country? America will give you a permission slip to act on any sexual vice you have, as long as you become docile and under their control. That's the American deal. That's the American way of life. And plenty of churchmen succumb to that crooked deal, and we are living the consequences of it. That's the problem. The Jesuits are the avant-garde of the homosexual mafia in the Catholic Church right now. James Martin. Check out James Martin, SJ, and ask yourself, how does that fit in with Catholic moral teaching?
Yeah, I know who James Martin is. It's quite fascinating. I don't understand why, again, there's no counter within the Catholic Church to the Jesuits preaching liberation theology. How come?
Counter. Unless you're talking to the counter. Vox flamens in deserto. I am the voice crying in the wilderness.
Right on, man. Well, I think you've been very tireless as of late, and really been generous with your time with a lot of people, and I think I can speak for everybody, including my listeners, that we really do appreciate it. It's about time, damn it. You know what I mean?
Yes. And Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He doesn't change, no matter how many sinners are running the church. He doesn't change at all, and you can have access to him through those sacraments. And that's the important thing, because those sacraments are the source of strength that will allow you to overcome whatever problem you have and rejoin God's plan, the original plan that you messed up.
Logos.
Yes, now that's it.
Now, before I let you go, I just wanted to confirm, you're working on a book right now on Logos specifically?
Yeah, the history of Logos and the Logos of history. Okay.
And then, do you know what, kind of have a date when that will be available?
No, but I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. So I started in my usual fashion, except in an exaggerate, I started at the beginning of time.
Wow.
Okay.
Can't wait for that.
And I'm up to 1806. So that's a pretty significant chunk of time, right?
Yes.
You know, however you want to slice it. Yeah, so I'm up to 1806.
Perfect.
Where can we get a copy from on Culture Wars or on?
It's not been printed. I'm hoping to have it out by the end of the year. So if you sign up with Culture Wars magazine, you will be the first to know.
Perfect.
There will a chapter will appear, so you can get a preview of what this book is really about. A chapter will probably appear this summer, the latest chapter. So you can also join in the conversation by dealing with other like-minded people and write in and listen to what they have to say about it in a much more. I don't want to denigrate the internet, but it's a much more civilized fashion because you have to put it in writing, and that's better to put it in writing because then. The people can't switch the video on you.
Put words in your mouth.
Put words in my mouth. You get the last word.
Wow. Okay, well, that was great having you on, Dr. Jones. I really appreciate it. I want everybody to check out, I put a link to culturewars.com below. So, guys, go check it out. Become a member. Check out his books. He's got lots of good stuff. So, anyway, thanks again, Dr. Jones, for coming on. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Have a good evening, and we'll hope to talk to you again soon.
You too.
Yeah.
Peace. Salam.
Salam.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Send me the link.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'll send you the link through Skype.